You know, one of my favorite things, and this going back to when I was a little kid, is hunting late season food sources and food opportunities. And boy, when we were back in, 86, 87, 88, the 90s, we didn't have food plots to go hunt on private land. And so a lot of you don't. And to be honest, we didn't own land. And I look at it like, someone will say, well, we have land, but we can't afford food plots. Well, if you can afford the land, you can afford the food plots. I wouldn't buy land. I'd buy a smaller piece so I could actually manage the land well. And the reason is because they're enjoyable. For one thing, you can work on it all year. And this is not a food plot video, but it's one of the food sources that you can hunt. But bottom line is you can work on it all year. It's very enjoyable. And if you don't have food plots, a neighbor with a good management plan within a mile of you will all of a sudden suck in all the deer, and you won't have a very good herd. And to say that you can manage private land without a food plot is misleading, very misleading. That's someone who has something against food plots, and they're just telling you poor information. So food sources are critical. And back in the 80s, back in the 90s, when we didn't have food plots, we were always chasing the food source of the moment, and it wasn't that much different than hunting public land. Food source is critical because after the primary rut, and after the second rut is over, we get into mid-December, somewhere around there, those bucks are on recovery mode. A lot of times they're not moving around in the morning, they're already sitting. But when it's super cold in the morning, there's an opportunity for food. Deer are very efficient creatures. They know how to conserve energy. So they don't want to move around when it's the coldest to forage and eat. What that means is at daybreak, that's the coldest time of the day. They're just bedded down. However, a lot of times they get up and they like to forage a little bit. And even on a property with a great food plot system, that means that they're sitting next to clear-cut areas, recent logging on your neighbors, maybe some acorns that are still hanging around, like some red oak acorns, apples that are still holding, but especially diverse areas. So if you have big open hardwoods, that's why I say clear cuts or cuttings, because if you have big open clear cuts or big open hardwoods, there's no food there. In fact, you can have less than 100 pounds of forage per acre per year in a stand of open hardwoods. And even if there's acorns, you can have a little bit of flurry of acorns, but there's not much left the rest of the year. There's really no food in those areas. So very slim pickings. But when you have that diversity, and diversity I'm talking about, think of upland cover where there's sumac, briars, weeds, grasses, shrubs, conifers, hardwood regen, new hardwood growth. When you have it all in one spot, add a swamp edge in there. I see a lot of great hunting on swamp edge areas where you have red osier dogwood, tag alder thickets, mixed with a lot of diversity of lowland. When that combines with upland, that could be some of the best places to find deer. So we scout deer for a living. We go to client properties, we scout their land, we develop a plan for them, and it's amazing to see how many deer are around those diversity pockets where you have everything in one location. If it's big hardwoods, probably not a lot of deer. If it's big conifers, probably not a lot of deer. The only time they like conifers and cedars and really thick thermal protection is when it snows really super hard. Other than that, 2 or 3 days, they're back out because they need to eat. They need to eat 5 times a day, a 24-hour period. So that's that number one factor, and you can really take advantage of that in the morning, because if you can sneak into known bedding areas on the edge, not into them, but on the edge where you're not going to spook deer, you could get in there daylight. Have a post-daybreak stand entrance. So you get in there, you're on the edge of that thick cover, and you're waiting for those deer to feed and come out and take a little bit of a snack when it starts to warm up at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. Might have been 17 degrees at daybreak, but then all of a sudden it's it's warming up to 37 just a few hours later when that sun comes up. So really good opportunity there. But when it comes to hunting food sources, and a lot of times even if you have food plots in a situation like that, they're not going all the way into an open food plot to feed, and typically that's not right next to their bedding area, especially when it comes to mature bucks. They're going to travel a long ways to get to that food plot. A lot different than a doe family group that might be bedding literally right next to it, right adjacent. And that's where you can always plan, is those big food sources, does, fawns, young bucks, and then bucks. There's that layering system. We see that. Doesn't matter if it's on private land or public land. So that afternoon food source, hunting is critical. I'm going into an area like that, and I'm looking at that same spot that I would hunt with no food plots, private land. You're looking for that diversity, clear cuts on public land. And so whether it's private or public land, it's the same exact strategy. You're getting in, excuse me, as close as you can get to a mature buck bedding area or suspected bedding area without bumping them. And the problem is at that time of the year, when you bump them, really bad, because they're already used to being pushed around. They've already been hunter pressured, and it takes very little when things are crispy and snowy for a deer to completely relocate. And a lot of times, if they're relocating, they're not coming back. A lot of times for weeks at a time. We see it when we go walk a property in February. Landowners say, wow, we haven't had deer on the property for months. We had a terrible November, terrible December. We're out there in February and there's deer everywhere. It's because they had diversity, but the lowest hole in the bucket is always hunting pressure. So even if you have the best habitat, the best food plots, you can spook those deer off and they're not coming back. So I'm looking at getting adjacent, and really the best case scenario is you have really good diversity and habitat regeneration on a private parcel. Then you have those food plots that are still holding, they still have appreciable food, and you're hunting that thick travel between bedding and food, not necessarily on the food unless it's muzzleloader or gun season. You can shoot them from afar. I go to so many properties, and I'm sure Dylan does, where we go to a really nice food source and there's a big old blind right on the edge of it. They can't possibly get in and out without spooking deer. And that's a really big problem because they're good for one sit. And so then what ends up happening is we go to that property, they have a really nice food source, they might even have good habitat, but they're not seeing deer till February when we're out there looking at their land because they hunter pressured it one or two times, and there's a diminishing return every time you sit on the property, and pretty soon those deer are nocturnal. If they're nocturnal, that means they're going to move somewhere else. They're not even going to relate to your property. It doesn't matter if it's public land or private land. You can spook out those late season food sources and they're not coming back. And especially on public land, those deer have a lot of room to roam. So I'm always looking for those clear-cut edges, diversity edges, and a lot of times you can look at an aerial photo and you can look at and see where you have lots of different colors and you have small shapes, big shapes. You know there's diversity. It's all the same color, big tops, you know it's hardwoods. Look for those changes. You can take 5,000 acres of public, and because a lot of it, and especially forestry, like federal land, there's not a lot of diversity. So the diversity really shows. A lot of times that is swamp edge on public land. But I'm getting into position in the afternoon, going through non-deer habitat, open habitat, non-food habitat, and then I'm waiting on the edge of good habitat in some type of funnel. It might be a thick ridge top that's leading to a clear cut. It might be on the edge of a clear cut, or it's maybe an inside corner where deer will just travel back and forth, almost like an inside corner of an ag field, where deer will cross back and forth across that corner. The bottom line is the importance of food during the late season cannot be overstated. And that's why if you have private land and you own private land, you probably can afford some quality food plots. And it's a lot more important to have that food as the season grows and it gets into November, December, often than it is to have food in August, September. And I'm not saying you don't have food at that time. The point is, when it gets to the late season and you're looking for a deer herd to hunt, it's really slim pickings in the deer woods. There's not a lot of food available. Most of it's already hunter pressured. Most of it's already eaten. There's not a lot of good habitat, bedding habitat at that time because it's been overpressured. Again, the lowest hole in the bucket is hunting pressure. So look for that opportunity late morning where you can go in right at daybreak, sit next to a bedding area when it's super cold, wait for deer to come out to a food source you're watching, a little limited food source, and then certainly pay a lot of attention to those great afternoon setups where you're sneaking in and you can watch a food source. We've named a bunch of them. Doesn't matter if it's clear-cut public land, that swamp edge. You're looking for that level of diversity where you can hunt. And finally, when you find it, don't mess it up. Because if you hunter pressure those deer, especially this time of year, they're gone and they're not coming back till next year, February, late January. We see it all the time. So if you keen on those food sources like we did when we were in the 80s and 90s, looking for those thick areas, and we weren't even knowing that we're keen on food sources. We're just looking at, well, this is a brushy area, and it's snowing, and all the deer tracks are going in there for a reason. Well, looking back, it's because they had browse, because they had food during the day, and that's where you'll find those deer this time of year. It can really set you up for an outstanding hunt during the late season, especially if you don't mess it up. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. You're our best followers. You followed all the way to the end of the video. Really invite you to check out our website. We have our earthway spreaders for sale, great Christmas presents. We're booking clients right now, all 5 of us. So by the end of December, it seems early, but by the end of December, our schedule will be booked for 2025. It's hard to believe. I'm already booked for December and most of January, February. We have our web classes, the rut web class, how to design your whitetail property, and really important, hunting hills and thermals, understanding the wind. Those are great products on our site, all the books. Thank you so much for watching all the videos, buying the seed that you did this year. Really appreciate you.